powered by Riverside FM.
This week, the BBC sacked high-profile presenter Greg Wallace, probably best known for being a co-host of the cooking programme Masterchef. The sacking follows an investigation in November of last year, following a string of allegations of inappropriate sexual comments being made by Greg Wallace. Last week, it emerged that 50 additional allegations had been made against him, now including both inappropriate comments and inappropriate sexual behaviour, including groping. What is striking from the story is the volume of complaints. 50 additional complaints on top of what was originally 13 announced last November. The intuitive reaction to a volume of 50 complaints is along the lines of, there is no smoke without fire. What I'll explore in this episode is how the volume of complaints in and of themselves correlates with the likelihood of him being guilty. This will focus purely on the volume of complaints without testing or exploring any of the actual evidence. I will draw on some simple principles from something known as Bayes' theorem. This is a way of thinking about probability that is based on known information and belief. It's particularly useful in situations where you want to know the probability of something conditional on additional information. In this particular case, I'm interested in the probability that he is guilty given that he has been accused, or in fact, repeatedly accused. To start with, let's think about the scenario where there's just one individual accusation. And here, we will need some assumptions. For these, I will be choosing hypothetical but not implausible numbers. The first ingredient is the need to have a view on the probability that any individual might be guilty. Purely for simplicity, we'll assume that this is 1 in 1,000 people. A worrying assumption. Next, we need to take a view on the probability that someone is accused, given that they are in fact guilty. In this case, let's assume it's 90%. Now this is complicated. While victims may wish to ensure that justice is done, they may fear the consequences of making accusations. Therefore, in reality, the probability that a victim does raise an allegation when someone is guilty is likely to be a lot lower than 90%.
Then the final piece of the puzzle that we need is what is the probability that someone is accused if they are not actually guilty?
I.e., to what extent are there vexatious and unfounded allegations being made in society? This is a rare occurrence, but it does sometimes happen. Again, purely for the simplicity of this example, let's assume it occurs 1% of the time. Using this, the mass of Bayes' theorem, which I won't go through, will tell you that the probability that someone is guilty, given that they have been accused, is actually only 8%. The intuition behind this stems from the fact that we have assumed that most people in the population are not in fact guilty. Only 1 in 1,000 are. Therefore, one accusation doesn't tell you that much. Further, with a 1% false accusation rate, you would expect there to be around 10 not guilty people who are actually accused. Hence, without knowing that they're actually innocent, you would expect to observe 10 people accused who are innocent, plus one additional person accused who is in fact guilty. That amounts to about 8% probability that an accused person is guilty. But that isn't the scenario of interest here. Here, we have multiple accusations. If the accusations are independent, the cumulative probability of guilt grows very quickly. In fact, you don't really need Bayes' rule at all here. All you need to do is return to your view of the probability that a false accusation might be made. Earlier we suggested this was 1%. Accordingly, if someone is innocent, there's only a 1% chance that they might be falsely accused. The chance of a second accusation is only 1% of the first, i.e. it's 1% multiplied by 1%. This already becomes quite a small number. By the time you have treated 50 accusations in this way, i.e. you have done 1% to the power of 50, you get to a really very small number. Indeed, it's an astronomically small number that's hard to describe just how small it is. That small number is the chance that they are innocent. The chance that they are guilty is the opposite. So after 50 accusations, the probability that they're guilty statistically is virtually 1. Before we leave the statistics though, in the Greg Wallace case, later on this week, further details emerged that actually there had been 83 complaints, and following the investigation, 45 of these were upheld. If you took those numbers at face value, it would suggest that you need to revise some of the above assumptions, particularly in relation to some of the claims that have been not upheld, and you may statistically treat as unfounded claims. But even if you use those numbers and plug it through the above calculation, you will still come out with a similar result. None of the above has included any assessment of actual evidence, and this is important in the context of the legal system. In UK criminal law, for a case to be upheld, there does usually require evidence. Evidence can include physical evidence, behavioural evidence, expert evidence, or testimony. So in this case, statements from accusers and other potential witnesses would indeed count as evidence. The relevant legal standard would be that the jury is convinced beyond reasonable doubt of guilt. But this is not a numeric probability. You cannot draw a percentage threshold and compare it to the outcomes of probability models such as those just described. It is more an assessment that jurors must make themselves, and they must consider that the quality of the evidence fits that particular standard. Note that there is some appeal to relying on the statistics to inform a decision. Juries are actually instructed not to convict based purely on the quantity of accusations. This seems like a difficult concept to consider. In the situations I've just described, the volume of accusations certainly seems relevant, and indeed a scenario where an innocent person was convicted purely on the basis of a high volume of accusations that have all been made falsely and vexatiously is vanishingly small. It does seem that the volume of accusations should carry some weight in line with our intuition.